Chapter 8: The Sin of Obscurity. There is a form of failure that does not look like failure. It does not appear as error or incompetence or lack of effort. In fact, it often appears impressive. It sounds intelligent. It carries the language of depth. It creates the impression that something meaningful is being communicated. But when examined closely, it produces no understanding. This is obscurity. And obscurity is not harmless. It is not neutral. It is not a stylistic choice. It is a failure of responsibility. At its worst, it becomes a kind of deception, not necessarily intentional, but real in its effects. Because it presents the appearance of clarity while withholding its substance. This is why it must be confronted directly. Obscurity often hides behind complexity. There is a tendency to assume that if something sounds sophisticated, it must be valuable. That if language is dense, it must be deep. That if a message is difficult to follow, it must contain insight. But this is not always true. Complexity can be necessary in some cases, but unnecessary complexity, complexity that does not serve understanding, becomes a barrier. It prevents people from seeing what is actually being said. It creates distance between the message and the listener. It requires effort that is reasonable. And over time, it leads to disengagement. This is not depth, it is obstruction. Jargon plays a similar role. In many fields, specialized language develops as a way to communicate efficiently among those who understand it. But when that language is used without consideration for the audience, it becomes exclusionary. It signals belonging to a group, but it does not always serve understanding. In business, this is common. Terms are used that sound precise, but often lack clear meaning when examined. Phrases are repeated because they are familiar, not because they are helpful. And as a result, communication becomes layered with words that obscure rather than reveal. The message becomes difficult to follow, even when it is important. There is also a more subtle cause of obscurity: pride. Pride does not always appear as arrogance. Sometimes it appears as a desire to appear knowledgeable, to be seen as intelligent, to be recognized for depth. This can lead to communication that prioritizes appearance over understanding. Instead of asking, "Is this clear?" the focus becomes, "Does this sound impressive?" Instead of removing what is unnecessary, more is added. Instead of refining the message, it is expanded in ways that make it harder to grasp. And in this process, clarity is sacrificed. This is where obscurity becomes more than a technical issue. It becomes a moral one. If you carry something that has the potential to help others, and you communicate it in a way that prevents them from understanding it, you have not fulfilled your responsibility. You may have spoken, you may have written, you may have presented, but if understanding has not taken place, the work is incomplete. And if this is done consistently, if complexity, jargon, or pride are allowed to shape communication, then obscurity becomes a pattern. This is why it can be described as a sin, not in the sense of intentional wrongdoing, but in the sense of missing the mark, failing to do what should have been done. This connects directly to the problem you have identified in your work. From this point, I speak to myself. In The Cinematic Strategists, you describe the gap between those who think and those who execute. The strategist produces a document filled with ideas, frameworks, and language. The vendor takes instructions and produces outputs. But between these two, something is lost. The meaning is not fully translated. The intent is not clearly carried through. The result is work that exists, but does not fully communicate what it was meant to. This is the strategic void, and obscurity plays a central role in its creation. The strategist often operates at a level of abstraction that is not easily translated. The language becomes complex, layered, and difficult to interpret. The ideas may be strong, but they are not made accessible. The vendor, on the other hand, focuses on execution without fully understanding the underlying intent. The output may be polished, but it lacks alignment with the deeper meaning. In both cases, clarity is missing. And when clarity is missing, value is lost. This is not just a business issue, it is a communication issue. It is what happens when responsibility for clarity is not taken seriously. The strategist assumes understanding, the vendor assumes instruction, and the audience receives something that does not fully make sense. This is obscurity in practice. The sin, the consequences are both practical and spiritual. Practically, obscurity leads to inefficiency. Time is spent clarifying what should have been clear from the beginning. Resources are used to correct misunderstandings. Opportunities are lost because the message did not land. It also leads to frustration. People feel uncertain. They hesitate. They question. And over time, trust begins to weaken because unclear communication creates doubts. Spiritually, the implications are deeper. If clarity reflects the nature of God, then obscurity moves away from that alignment. It introduces confusion. It prevents understanding. It interrupts the process through which truth is received and acted upon. If a message is not clear, it cannot be properly received. And if it is not received, it cannot produce transformation. This is why clarity matters so deeply in the communication of truth. Because truth is not only meant to be spoken, it is meant to be understood. There is also a responsibility to examine intent. Not all obscurity is intentional, but some of it is allowed. It is allowed when clarity is not prioritized, when communication is rushed, when the focus is on expression rather than understanding. This is why obscurity must be recognized and addressed, not with judgment, but with awareness. Clarity requires humility. It requires the willingness to simplify, to remove what is unnecessary, to ask whether something can be understood, not just whether it sounds correct. It requires the discipline to refine ideas until they can be expressed clearly, to test communication against understanding, not assumption. This is not always easy, but it is necessary. Take a moment to reflect. Where might you be hiding behind complexity? Where might your language be clear to you, but unclear to others? Where might pride be influencing how you communicate? These are not comfortable questions, but they are important because obscurity does not announce itself. It must be identified. The goal is not to remove depth. The goal is to remove what prevents depth from being seen. Because what is clear can be understood, and what is understood can be received, and what is received can produce change. Obscurity hides value. Clarity reveals it. And if you are entrusted with something that matters, then it must not remain hidden. It must be made clear.